Okay? All right, I can hear myself now. The text this morning is Mark chapter 3, verses 7 through 19. If you want to turn with me in your Bibles to that at this time, we're going to look at Mark chapter 3, verses 7 through 19. And as usual, we'll read through the text, and then we'll start looking at it in more detail. Let me fix my mic here, though. Feel right. All right. We'll go with that. Hope for the best here. All right. Mark chapter 3, verse 7 says, Jesus withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a great multitude from Galilee followed, and also from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and beyond the Jordan, and the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon. A great number of people heard all that he was doing and came to him. And he told his disciples that a boat should stand ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crowd him. For he had healed many, with the result that all those who had afflictions pressed about him in order to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." And he earnestly warned them not to tell who he was. And he went up on the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him, and he appointed the 12, so that they would be with him, and that he could send them out to preach, and would have authority to cast out the demons. And he appointed the 12, Simon, whom he gave the name Peter, and James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. And Andrew and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, beginning in verse 7, the narrative shifts off of the repeated contentions with the religious establishment, which we've been looking at for the past several weeks, and on to a new idea, and that new idea is the idea of genuine friendship and loyalty. Throughout the remainder of chapter 3, Jesus was surrounded by a lot of people who you'd think were his friends, but they really weren't. And he repeatedly distanced himself from these supposed friends for the sake of his true friends. And we see this in our text, which begins with absolutely huge crowds, even bigger crowds than the people that we've seen previously. And they were all displaying admiration and devotion to him outwardly. However, the text concludes with Jesus distancing himself from all of these supposed devotees and hand-selecting a very small handful of men from among them whom he identified as the real deal, his real friends, who were the disciples. And we see this idea later on in the chapter in verse 21, where Jesus' family, who you'd think, again, were his friends, they were his immediate family, these people treated him as though he was crazy. Again, we see that in verse 21, which is why in verse 35, at the end of the chapter, Jesus identified those who did his will as his true family, above even his biological brothers and sisters. So again, this theme kind of goes throughout the rest of the chapter. So in this text, there are true friends, and there are fake friends. And Jesus doesn't identify his true friends in the way we might initially think that he does. And as I was thinking about this and looking at some different ideas, I came across a meme. I don't know who to give credit to it. It certainly wasn't me. And I don't want to cite them. I wish I knew who to give credit to this, but I'm just going to put it up on the board for you. It's something that I saw. I'll read through it for you. But it gives this idea of what real friends look like. It just captures it so well. So I'm just going to read through it with you. Fake friends never ask for food. Real friends are the reasons you have no food. Fake friends call your parents Mr. and Mrs. Real friends call your parents Dad and Mom. Fake friends have never seen you cry. Real friends cry with you. Fake friends borrow your stuff for a few days and then give it back. Real friends keep your stuff so long they forget and it's yours. They forget that it's yours. Fake friends know all about you. Real friends could write a book about you. Fake friends would knock on your front door. Real friends walk right in and say, "I'm home." Fake friends will help you up when you fall over. Real friends will jump on top of you and shout, "Dog pile." Fake friends are around for a while. Real friends are friends for life. Fake friends say I love you in a joking manner. Real friends say I love you and they really mean it. And then this last one says fake friends will read this and real friends will steal it. But the idea is there. It's a common misconception to view those who behave most appropriately towards us and who are most respectful of our boundaries, to view those people as our closest friends. But in reality, the ongoing presence of formality indicates distance. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily indicate closeness at all. Your real friends are the ones who are so close to you that they can barge right into your life without normal protocol. At first glance, this looks like disrespect, but in reality, it can mean the deepest of friendship. Does that make sense? And that's why your closest friends are the ones that can barge right in and say, I'm home. Your closest friends are the ones that borrow your stuff and forget that it belongs to you. It's because there's such a closeness of relationship there that the protocols break down sometimes. And the same idea is in our text. That's the same idea that's being communicated in the text right now. Jesus is surrounded by huge crowds of people who are saying and doing things that appear to communicate respect and devotion. But upon closer examination, the opposite was actually true. What they were doing communicated distance and even false friendship in some cases, not true friendship. So with all that said, there are three people groups in this text. Two are false friends, and the last are Jesus' true friends. We're going to step through all three of them, and in the process we'll unpack their quote-unquote friendly behavior and then their actual motives behind it. And hopefully when we're done, we'll know a little more about how to spot false friends and how to spot true friends in our lives as we are just functioning in the day-to-day world today. So the first group of people in our text are the crowds at large. The crowds at large. This is where you want to follow along in your outline if you have the copy there. Now initially, we might draw the conclusion that the crowds were Jesus' friends and that they were highly devoted to him. But look at what the text, if you look at what the text says about them, you can get this impression. And we'll look in verses 7 and 8. Follow along with me. Jesus withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a large multitude from Galilee followed, and also from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and beyond the Jordan, and the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon. A great number of people heard about everything that he was doing, and they came to him. And the idea here is that the crowds following Jesus were no longer just from the surrounding towns of Galilee anymore. At this point, people were traveling from the farthest corners of Palestine to see him. And I'm going to put a map up on the board that isn't a very good one. You're probably not going to be able to make it out, and I apologize. Just do the best that you can with it. But if you look kind of in the center, towards the top, there's the region of Galilee, which is right there near the Sea of Galilee. That's where he was, and up to this point, that's where he was drawing the crowds from. But what this text is saying is that as things are progressing, he's not drawing crowds from just there anymore. He's drawing crowds from everywhere on the map. It says that he's drawing them from Judea, which is south of Galilee, and Jerusalem, which is in the territory of Judea. And when it says Idumea, if you look below towards the bottom of the map, that's Idumea. That's where he's drawing from. Also, beyond the Jordan is more towards the east side of the map on the other side of the Jordan River. And also it says Tyre and Sidon, which is near the top. And so again, the point here is that people are traveling 50 to 100 miles one way, absolutely huge distances in that day, in order to see him. And at first glance, this could be interpreted as love and devotion. However, there is another clue in this account that sheds a bit more light on things, and we see it in verses 9 and 10. Follow along with me. And he told his disciples to see that a boat would be ready for him because of the masses, so that they would not crowd him, for he had healed many, with the result that all those who had diseases pushed in around him in order to touch him. In other words, the crowds were pressing in on Jesus so intensely at this point that it was becoming physically dangerous. Do you see it there? They were pressing in so intensely that it was becoming physically dangerous. And so he had a plan of escape in place just in case he needed it. Just in case he lost control of the mob, he could come back into the boat and get away from there before he got trampled, before he got crushed. Now, when we put all these details together, we can see that the crowd's behavior wasn't as friendly as it might have initially seemed. The crowds weren't merely following Jesus, they were actually clamoring after him. Does that make sense? They weren't just following him, they were clamoring after him. They were thronging after him and trampling over each other to get to him, somewhat like a frenzied mob by this point. It was getting a bit out of control. This wasn't friendly at all. It was dangerous to him, and it was dangerous to everyone around. And if you were to ask the crowds, though, they would have said, oh, we love Jesus, we love Jesus. But in reality, they weren't behaving like Jesus' true friends. The way they were behaving was something different. So if the crowds at large weren't really Jesus' friends, then why were they following him so intensely? What was their true motivation? The answer is that they sought to use Jesus as a resource. When you really get under what's going on here, they sought to use Jesus as a resource. They saw him as a powerful person who could give them things that their hearts longed for. They sought to use him as a resource. Now, to be fair, the things they desired were completely understandable in most cases. By and large, the crowd sought physical healing and deliverance from demons. Again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. There was nothing wrong with wanting those things at all in general. The problem was that they sought to use Jesus to get these things from him. They didn't actually care about Jesus as a person or about how meeting their needs affected him in any way, shape, or form. All they cared about was getting what they came for. Their interest in Jesus was only as a tool or as a resource to meet their needs. Beyond this, he really didn't have any value to them. And it's harsh to hear, but it's true. And Jesus understood this very clearly about the crowds. And this is why he said to the crowds who skirted the Sea of Galilee looking for him after the feeding of the 5,000. I'm going to go back to John 6 now, but he had the feeding of the 5,000, and he got away from them in a boat, similar to what he was prepping to do here, and the crowd skirted around the entire sea to find him. This is what he said to these people as they hunted him down after the feeding of the 5,000. He said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate some of the loaves and were filled. That's why you seek me." In other words, you really don't care about me or the gospel that I preach. You see me as a resource. You see me as a tool to provide you with a steady supply of bread. That's why you're coming. That's what he's saying there. Now, this is why the crowds, to put this in another context as well, this is why the crowds were so quick to hand him over for crucifixion, just days after receiving him as Messiah on Palm Sunday. He stopped meeting their expectations, and once he stopped meeting their expectations, they immediately discarded him. Again, they're shouting praise, Hosanna to the Son of David, waving palm branches, saying so much on Palm Sunday. Within days, they're discarding him. Why? Because he was a resource, because he was a tool. That's it. He was not a person to them. Does that make sense? That's why we can do that to people. That's why they did that to him. Now, before we're too hard on the crowds, though, we must remember that we can treat Jesus the same way today. We can treat him more like a magic genie to serve us and to grant our wishes than a person to have a relationship. Why do you pray to him? Do you pray to have a relationship? Do you read the scriptures to have a relationship? Or do you just go to God when you need stuff? If you're just one of those guys that just prays whenever you need stuff, you're kind of treating him like a magic genie. You're kind of treating him like a tool or a resource, not someone to have a relationship, but someone to use, okay? We can come to him only when we want things, and we can murmur against him and turn on him when he doesn't give us what we want. This isn't how true friends of Jesus treat him. This is how the crowds in the text treated him, but this isn't how true friends treat him. You can't grow in your relationship with Jesus when you treat Jesus this way. And there's something else to consider as well. In general, things like a home or an income or health care or education or opportunities for our children or security to walk the streets and live our lives in safety, these are all really important things that tend to preoccupy our mind, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what are we willing to do to get those things? Who are we willing to trample over? What injustice to others are we willing to turn a blind eye to in order to get these things for ourselves? Do you understand what I'm asking here? The crowds were seeking some really good things. They were seeking healing, they were seeking deliverance, but they were trampling over everybody and Jesus trying to get them. We seek similar things today. We seek security. Who are we willing to trample over to get the things that we want for ourselves? The crowds were willing to trample over their neighbors. They were willing to crush Jesus personally to get stuff like that. That's not how friendship works. That's not how we'll make friends with God or with our fellow man. True friends value people above what people can do for them. They value the person themselves. True friends value character, the character to do right by others, above the power to get things for themselves. We need to keep that in mind. So that was the first group. The second group of people in our text are the demon-possessed. The demon-possessed. What's fascinating about this group is that at surface level, their actions could be interpreted as the friendliest of them all. In a sense, what they did here could be interpreted as extremely friendly. Why do I say that? Because the demon-possessed proclaimed Jesus. They proclaimed him. That is to say, they fell down at his feet and confessed him as Messiah. All right? And don't believe me? Look at the text. Look in verse 11. It says, whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." Isn't that interesting? And by the way, this isn't the first time that we see the demons doing this. We've already seen it back in chapter 1. I'm going to give you just a second. I see people writing still. But back in chapter 1, if you're taking note, I'm going to put it up on the board now. This is Mark 1, 23 and 24. We went through this before. It says, just then there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "What business do you have with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." See how he's actually proclaiming Christ's messianic identity there. And spoiler alert, this won't be the last time that we see it either. It happens again in chapter 5. This is Mark chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed before them, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do you have with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." Again, declaring his messianic identity there. Now, how many of you have ever noticed this tendency of the demons in the scriptures and found it really weird? Did you ever read through that and go, that is really weird. Why is that happening? Why is it that the demons of all characters in the text are the ones attempting to proclaim Jesus' messianic identity the loudest? And I'll begin answering with the obvious. And the obvious is it wasn't because they were Jesus' friends. It wasn't that at all. Their reasoning was much more sinister than that, very much more sinister. The demons viewed Jesus as a threat, and they proclaimed him in an attempt to undermine him. They viewed him as a threat, and they proclaimed him in an attempt to undermine him. Jesus, for his part, understood very clearly the danger of what was happening, and he responded to it decisively. If you look in the text, look in verse 12, it says he strongly warned them not to reveal who he was. And it says the same thing in chapter 1, and one of the examples I just showed you, this is Mark 1:25. After that, there was the declaration of the demon-possessed man there, and Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Don't say that. Be quiet. They shut him down. Jesus acted very decisively and told him, "Be quiet. Shut your mouth." But just because Jesus understood what was going on doesn't mean that we necessarily do today. So how is it that proclaiming the deity of Jesus could be a bad thing? Isn't that what we're all supposed to be doing? And with that in mind, how could the demons turn something like that into a bad thing? I'm going to give you two reasons, and I'm going to put them up on the board, but warning you now, these are not in your outline, so you'll have to write them in. I decided to add them in after I published it. So the first reason is this. The first and more obvious answer is that they were preempting Jesus' timeline. They were preempting his timeline. Jesus already had the time and the place prepared to make his messianic announcement to the nation, and that was his triumphal entry in Jerusalem, which we celebrate on Palm Sunday. We talked a little bit about it earlier. With this in mind, the demons' early announcement had the potential of undermining Christ's overall mission, kind of in the same way if you're in a battle and you have a whole bunch of different people in play and someone sounds the trumpet blast early. Do you understand what I'm saying? You have a plan going forward and you have this unit over here and that unit over there, and you say, when you hear the trumpet blast, come in at that time, not before then. Then someone sounds the trumpet blast early, it messes the whole battle up. It's kind of that same idea. There was timing here for a reason, and the early announcement did preempt that and did undermine what Jesus was doing, okay? And so that's the obvious reason, and it is correct. Don't get me wrong, it's correct. But there is actually another reason that we don't always see that's worth noting as well, and that is that they were tarnishing Jesus' credibility. They were tarnishing his credibility. They were tarnishing his credibility by endorsing him. Jesus wasn't looking for endorsements. He already had the endorsement of his heavenly Father. And we see that. We saw that already in Mark chapter 1. So I'm going to give you that passage just so that you can see it. But Jesus has the endorsement of his Father in heaven already. It says, in those days, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit, like a dove, descending upon him. And a voice came from the heavens, listen carefully, "You are my Son, in you I'm well pleased." There's the endorsement right there, all right? This is all the endorsement that Jesus ever wanted or needed. And to receive an endorsement from anyone else would actually undermine his deity. The reason that he stood on his own is because the only endorsement that he had was the Father, and that's all he needed. However, even fallen man who does seek endorsements from partnerships in this world can tell you that not all endorsements are helpful. Some endorsements do more harm than good. Would you believe me if I told you just in terms of worldly things, endorsements don't always help you. Sometimes endorsements hurt you. A very clear example of this is something that we're familiar with here, I'm sure, is former President Trump. He had this issue where the neo-Nazis and the KKK and extremist groups kept endorsing him. They kept saying, "He's our man. We love this guy." And he kept having to distance himself because he didn't want their endorsements. He kept having to back away and renounce them. But they kept claiming him all the time. It caused people to associate President Trump with extremism. And he had, again, to distance himself because that wasn't helping him. He didn't want that endorsement. And in our text, keeping that image in mind, not only is Jesus receiving an endorsement here from someone other than the Heavenly Father, he's receiving endorsements from demons. You see it? It's demons that are doing it, all right? And this hugely tarnished God's name, and the demons understood this, and this is why they were doing it, and this is why Jesus was shutting it down so aggressively. Unfortunately, the negative effects still followed him, and we see that later in the chapter. This is Mark chapter 3, verse 22. You can see it in your chapter if you look a little bit further on. The scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, "He is possessed by Beelzebub, and he casts out demons by the ruler of demons." Now, why on earth would the religious leaders say this? Where would they get this idea from? It's almost certainly a result of these demonic endorsements that kept happening. It's almost certainly where they got it from here. By proclaiming Jesus so loudly, they were giving fuel to Jesus' opposition and undermining his mission. Do you see how that works? He did not want this endorsement for very good reason. Now, something we learn from this today is that being a true friend of Jesus involves more than just affirming him with your words. Just because someone's saying, "Praise Jesus, I love you, Jesus," doesn't mean they're a friend. Doesn't mean that at all. Anyone can affirm Jesus. Even the demons can affirm Jesus. We see that in our text, and James said this as well in James 2. You believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and shudder. The demons believe, they affirm, they do all those things, but they're still his enemy. Being a true friend of Jesus involves actions that align with him just as much as our words align with him. Too often, praise and reverence for God is used to paper over the neglect of righteousness and the neglect of justice. And we saw a clear example of this last week when Jesus was expected to ignore an opportunity to help someone in need for the sake of keeping the Sabbath. You recall, we talked about that last week. There was the guy with the withered hand. He was in need. Jesus was right there, had the means to heal him, and they were all watching, expecting him not to do it, and wanting to treat Jesus as though he was doing something wrong if he would have, because this is the Sabbath, and we honor God on the Sabbath, and it would not be honoring to him to help somebody in need. Okay? So with that in mind, beware of any attempt to use the desire to praise and to honor God with our lips as an excuse for being inconsiderate or neglectful of the world around us. Does that make sense? If what we're hearing and what we're following is telling us that praise with our mouth is more important than doing what's right, then we have a problem. If we're being encouraged to praise and to worship more than considering and loving our fellow man, we have a problem. Watch out for that. It's sneaky. You can't always see it, but that's the way that it works. And our text is proof that the demons, even demons, can communicate praise and affirm Jesus. True friends don't just proclaim Jesus with their words, they proclaim him with both their words and their actions together. So, last group of people. Let's talk about the true friends now here. True friends are the disciples. And we see that in verses 13 through 19. in the end, Jesus hand-selected these men from among the crowd, and he related to them as true friends. And just a caveat here, we're not saying that there weren't other disciples in the crowd. We're not saying that everybody in the crowd was true friends and only these 12, or excuse me, we're not saying that everyone in the crowd was false friends and only these 12 were true. There were probably others, but the idea being communicated here overall is that the amount of true friends among them was small compared to the vast hordes that were following him. And when we look closely, we see 3 genuinely friendly behaviors about these men, which are worth noting, okay? 3 genuinely friendly behaviors. Follow along in your outline. First, they supported Jesus in his ministry. They supported him. We see this in verse 9. It's very interesting to see. Again, we read this before, but it says he told his disciples to see that a boat would be ready for him because of the masses so that they would not crowd him. And so if you can visualize the scene again, what's going on here is we have mobs of people thronging him and pressing him to get things from him. And then we see Jesus' true friends who are standing nearby with a boat ready to rescue him if he gets overrun by them. And so you see the crowds who are taking from Jesus, and you have the disciples who are supporting him and serving him as he ministered to the crowds. Do you see the difference? There were the crowds who were taking from him and getting for themselves, and there were among those huge crowds a few disciples who were there helping him as he ministered, supporting him along the way. You'll find your true friends among those supporting you in the tough times. You'll find your true friends who are with you and supporting you as you're living out life and serving other people. You'll find your true friends because they'll be part of the solution and not part of the problem in your life. That's one thing to watch for. Secondly, they listened to Jesus. They listened to him. This is implied in verse 14, where it says that Jesus selected these men to be with him. The disciples weren't there primarily to get stuff from Jesus as the crowds were. They were there to learn from him. They sought his heart, they sought his mind, and they sought these things more than they sought his power. And so they listened intently to what he taught, and they labored to understand. And we're going to see this more in the next chapter, but know this now. That was one of the big differences between the disciples and the crowd. The crowds were just there to get. The disciples were there to learn. And when Jesus spoke, they labored to understand. And here's a preview of the difference between them, between the crowds and the disciples, as immediately following the parable of the sower. This is Mark chapter 4, verses 10 through 12. As soon as he was alone, his followers, along with the 12 disciples, began asking him about the parables. And he was saying to them, to you, to his disciples, has been given the mystery of the kingdom of God, but to those who are outside, and in this case he's talking about those fake friends, everything comes in parables, so that while seeing they may see and not perceive, and while hearing they may hear and not understand, otherwise they might return and it would be forgiven them. There's a huge difference there. The disciples were there with Jesus. They heard the teaching along with them. They struggled to understand too, but they're going to Jesus and they're laboring to understand and receiving the explanation from him, unlike the crowds. Jesus' true friends listened to what he said. The crowds couldn't understand. The crowds honestly didn't care because that's not what they were there for to begin with. Lastly, the disciples imitated Jesus. They imitated him. We see this in the way that they went on to preach and to bear his authority. And the idea being communicated there is that they did what Jesus did. To the best of their ability, they lived how Jesus lived. They were inspired by Jesus. Jesus was their hero. And so they were there, again, not to get things from him or even to get, power from him per se, but they were trying to assimilate his character. They were trying to be like him. They were trying to emulate him with their lives. That's true friendship. But why did they behave so differently from the crowds? At the root of it all, what was it about the disciples that really made them be true friends of Jesus? The answer is that they sought to know Jesus as a person. They sought to know him as a person. For the disciples, Jesus was not a resource to be used. He was not some kind of a threat to their lives and to the things going on around them. For the disciples, Jesus was a supernatural person to know. He was someone to relate to. He was someone to learn from and to emulate. And that's the huge difference. true friends of Jesus are trying to know him. And you think of that in terms of just our own relationships with people in the world too. There are our true friends who care about us and want to know us, and there are our false friends who want to get things from us and use us. And you can kind of tell the difference. And sometimes it's your true friends who are the ones that tell you things that you don't want to hear, where your false friends will just say whatever you want to hear because they're trying to manipulate you. It's hard to tell sometimes the difference. But true friends, they seek to know you and be part of your lives. And Paul talked about this in Philippians 3. But whatever things were gained to me, these things I have counted loss because of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them mere rubbish, so that I may gain Christ. The disciples were true friends of Christ because they cashed in all the stuff that people were trying to get from Jesus, and they cashed it in for the ability to know Jesus. And we will be Christ's friends today if we take that same mentality. So, in conclusion, are you part of the crowds, or are you part of the disciples? Are you true friends who seek to know and to imitate Jesus? Or are you a false friend who wants to get stuff from him and will say anything, even worshipful, fanciful things? You'll say anything you need to get his favor so you can get stuff from him. Beware. True friends of Jesus don't necessarily look as reverent as you might think. And false friends will say all kinds of wonderful things. And they'll look real spiritual, but they're trying to manipulate. And false friends can be hard to spot. One of the things that we haven't talked about that maybe we can talk about in the small groups is that Judas was among those 12 that Jesus brought into the inner circle. And so there's something, there's a whole line of questioning that can go on with that. But the idea that we want to take away from it is that false friends are hard to spot. And true friends don't necessarily look as reverent and devoted outwardly as you might think. Oftentimes it's that closeness, that informality that communicates friendship. So we're going to sing at this time. And if you desire to join us, please mask up. And Sarah's going to lead us in worship. But before we do, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the example that you set. And we thank you for the disciples, Lord, and the example they set on what true friendship looks like. We thank you that you are a God we can relate to. We thank you that you're a Lord and Savior that we can have a relationship with and a friendship with. That in and of itself is an incredible thing. When we think about the fact that we cannot even communicate with the leaders of this world, but the King of the universe is someone that we can actually have a friendship with in an informal way. Father, help us to take advantage of that. Help us, or forgive us for neglecting that. And help us to communicate the open door that you have to the world around us. We ask these things in Jesus' name, and all of God's people said.